at the top of the agenda of the world order, and suddenly everyone comes to the Kremlin and listen to him very openly, and he's going to meet Biden. And so I want to ask you, do you see this current last week or two as something that signifies to you that America is back again and America is projecting power? If yes or no, and what are the applications to our region, to Iran and the Middle East?
Okay, thank you.
And you have only 2 hours. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you, Rav. It's delightful to be back with the presidents and my friends. Delightful to be with you. You should know I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my experience at 15 years old at Kibbutz Gan Shmuel.
Yeah.
Chazak
Oh,
Vermat.
this is
Chazak Vermat, serious business.
Shomer HaTzair.
Shomer HaTzair. And the answer to your question for me is unequivocal. It's not only that Ukraine is happening this week, it's also that Iran is likely to happen this week. And the two events are inextricably, and I think profoundly linked. Mm-hmm. They're both related to American weakness. It is the weakness of America that's basically going to go on all fours to Iran and make every possible exception, every possible concessions in order to achieve a renewal of an agreement which is probably going to be worse than the original in 2015, which redounds to nobody's benefit in this region. The impression that America is not going to stand by its allies and actually can cause them grievous harm through this agreement. Removing the military option from the table. Because one thing that President Obama used to say was all options on the table, including a military option, and President Biden and his advisors have never, ever said that. And it's clear that there is no military option. That's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. President Putin has internalized the lessons not only of what's going on in Iran, but the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the withdrawal from Syria, the withdrawal from Iraq, that America does not have a military option. President Biden's actually said that. There is no military option on the part of the United States and NATO for a possible Russian invasion. This enables Putin, to my mind, to win just about in any possible scenario. Either he invades Ukraine, and he'll pay a price for it, but for how long? The United States has also proven its willingness to remove sanctions after a relatively short period of time. Or he doesn't, and he manages to convince the West, persuade the West, to give in to his fundamental demands, which is to assure that Ukraine will not join NATO and that missiles will be removed from Poland and other former Soviet-packed countries. I think, as you said, he becomes the center of the conversation. He has put Russia back on the map as a power to be taken seriously. And we all, I'm sure Carissa is going to talk about this, but the Chinese factor here is huge. And it's interesting that the Chinese have signed a 25-year, $400 billion agreement with Iran. At the same time that China is also backing Russia's position in the Ukraine.
Just a quick follow-up question. What is the alternative? I mean, what is the alternative in the Iran case? If the alternative is military power, then I think that it's not only Biden that withdrew from Afghanistan, it's the American public. There is a war fatigue within the American public. Just a second.
Go ahead.
And then again, I don't think there is enough support among the American public to real military option in Iran, because if you have a threat, you have to make it credible threat, to make the projection that you're going to use it, and then to be ready to use it, and then to go to another war. And this time not with the Taliban, with a country of 80 million people with 4,000 years of civilization history, with Iran. Do you think that the American public would support that?
Well,
and if not, what's the alternative?
Well, first of all, you're right. It's one of the few truly bipartisan issues in Congress today, in Washington today, and that is isolationism. And it seems that the Democrats and the Republicans actually vie with one another to see who could be more isolationist. And that's true. But, for years now, there's been a false dichotomy presented, that it's either a deal with Iran or a war. And it's false because Iran has actually zero possibility of making war against the United States. It has no aircraft, it has no air force, it has no ground forces. And to quote Ehud Barak in many discussions that I participated with him with American officials, America could eliminate Iran's nuclear program with 1 hour of bombing from 50,000 feet in the air, and Iran has nothing to touch those strategic bombers. So it wasn't going to be about war.
Yeah, but then you might have another 9/11 in L.A. by Iranian proxies.
But you may have it anyway. The Iranians tried to assassinate me in downtown Washington before the Iran nuclear deal. You may have it anyway. Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. If your fear is Iranian terror, boy, you are on the wrong planet, because that's what they're in the business of.
But an American war in Iran do not affect the level of motivation or practical
Could be, but here's my point.
capability to produce
Here's
terror.
my
I mean,
point. By failing to demonstrate power in Iran, you get the Ukraine. You get a bigger war. And if anything teaches us in history, and it's just not going back, the primary example is the 1930s. If you don't put your foot down when you can put your foot down, you're going to have to put your foot down when you really can't put your foot down. And that is, I think, the profound and eternal lesson of history. I can give you many examples from the Six-Day War. By the way, Ayal, the Syrians during the Six-Day War, when they were convinced that we weren't going to respond to the shelling in the Galilee. So we got a bigger war by not responding. So that's it. That's it. You didn't respond in Iran. You're going to get the Ukraine. By the way, chances are you're going to get Taiwan as well.
Yeah. Do you think it's a matter of the person in the Oval Office, or it's a matter of the American public and bigger or deeper dynamics within the American public?
Unquestionably, I got to reiterate, the isolationist fervor in the United States is very deep and getting deeper. But here I'm not going to quote Ed Barak. I keep on quoting labor rights. I want to quote Shimon Peres. Through many meetings, I used to sit with him. And he used to say, what can you do? Sometimes a leader has to lead and take unpopular positions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Following this perspective, I want to turn to you, Professor Anna Geff-Panahi, and specialist in Russian studies and Russian history. Good to have you here. So I want to ask the mirroring question that I asked Michael. Do you think that the Ukrainian crisis right now, it's mainly about the authentic fear of Putin, of NATO in his doorsteps? He doesn't want NATO on his doorsteps, which is, we can argue about it, but it might be authentic. Or it's a much bigger game that Putin used the Ukraine and NATO only as a means to an end, and the end is to become again a great power. And in that sense, what is the ramification of the outcomes in Ukraine now on our region?
Okay, so NATO is at Putin's doorstep already. The former Baltic states, which used to be part of the Soviet Union, are part of NATO, part of the European Union also. So it's not all this discussion about Putin fearing NATO, or he doesn't want them, the troops to be too close, or the rockets to be too.
There is no distinction between the Baltic states. By the way, Lithuania is not having do not share the same border with Russia, but with Belarus, which is maybe proxy Russia. It doesn't mean, but there is no distinction between Latvia and Estonia and more than 1,000 kilometer border with Ukraine. I mean, doesn't it make
what? It doesn't make them.
No. I'm asking if it's not true to say that Putin has a case. I'm not being judgmental, but he has a case that Ukraine,
he can use
makes the level of NATO much higher.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think, at least in my eyes, I think the whole issue is a domestic issue. It's not a question of him being afraid of the West. He's not afraid. He's the way he behaves. He may be cautious. He doesn't want the sanctions. He doesn't want his own money to be frozen anywhere. In my opinion, I think it's a domestic issue. He said himself that the disintegration of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. He wants it back. He doesn't, maybe not the Soviet Union, but he wants Russia to be great again, which is, this is what he's trying to do. The question is why? I think it's a much more interesting question than, of course, every empire wants to grab bits and pieces of territories. Who doesn't do it? Everyone has done it, and many people do it today. From the Russian point of view, from his point of view, why is it important? So there are a number of things that we need to list. First of all, he is a truly Russian leader, part and parcel of the Russian tradition. Someone who shares the Russian, of course, the Russian mentality and the Russian part. He's very much part of the Russian political culture. He thinks that that what he does is legitimate, what he does is appropriate, and what he does is how do you say magia? He's entitled. He's entitled. He's entitled. That's the key thing. Why is he entitled? And
because it was taken away from him. Let me be the Putin advocate.
Of course.
Something I like.
By the way,
let me be the devil's advocate. Here I call him the devil. Okay. He would say, back in the early 90s, right? The West gave him a commitment that NATO will not expand into the former USSR countries, and the West broke his word.
Okay, but this was why. Okay, so yes, it happened in 2004, right, with the Baltic states. Done. It's done. Why start the whole mess with the Ukrainians, and threaten everyone and lose face?
Because he doesn't like the global order which dominates by the United States and the
Why?
West. He wants to dominate it. Because every tribe wants to be on the top.
You know what? It's true that there are many people, many tribes, many peoples, many nations who claim that they are the chosen nations. There are people. I had a conversation with my doctoral student the other day. He works in Poland. He says, Poland, the Polish think that they're the chosen nation. I said, on what basis? And then the British used to think that they're the chosen nation. But maybe the Chinese, of course, you think that the chosen nation and everyone else is on their nation. Yeah. Okay, so what's the difference? What's the difference between the way the Polish think about themselves, or for example, or the Russians think?
The action.
Huh?
The action. You don't take actions. The Polish don't take actions in order to dominate the world.
The British had their share of actions. There's something else. In Poland, for example, I think that they chose in the sense that they're all nobility. Every single person is a nobleman. In Russia, it's something else. In Russia, it's something to do with the high meaning. The role of the Russian empire or state or the Soviet Union as a conglomeration as a leader, the world leader in what? In changing the world order. I agree with you. He does want to change the world order. But why? Because he thinks that they have the answer. They still think that Russia is what they used to say is the third Rome. Moscow is the third Rome. The first Rome fell to the barbarians back in the day because of their sins. Constantinople, Rome, the second Rome, fell to the Turks because of their sins. Russia in the 16th century became, in the 15th century, became Moscow, the third Rome, and there will be no more. There will be no other. They still think that there are the leaders, they are the only true Orthodox nation. They know best how to worship God. They have the special role as leaders of the Christian world. Not just the Orthodox one, but the entire Christendom, the entire Christian Rome, and they know how to bring the world to the final redemption. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Let me be a nudnik. You know what nudnik is? Let me be a nudnik.
Let me just say one thing.
You want to be a nudnik before I'm being a nudnik?
Let me just say for 1 second. A true Russian leader. It's not enough for a true Russian leader to grab bits and pieces of the territory. Many people have done that. A true Russian leader gives people what they want, i.e. meaning.
National pride.
Meaning, no, the empire which acts in a meaningful, spiritual, messianic way, which is something which characterizes its identity. It's deeply ingrained into their mentality. Somebody who grabs piece of territory is not a good Russian, not necessarily a good Russian leader.
Yeah.
Someone who does it because he wants to be, I don't know, close to Jerusalem, for example, just saying, is getting closer to be a good Russian leader.
A quick follow-up question, and not the Nudnik one question, okay? I want to use you as someone who came back from the cold and knows how the other side thinks.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, it seems, as Michael said, that the West doesn't have the means to win Russia or to have the upper end, because the West is a democracy. Putin doesn't have to take into consideration any kind of public opinion, allegedly, and the economy is in very bad situation, and he doesn't care about sanctions, and you know, so either anything that the West can do right now in order to constrain or to restrain Putin ambitions, rather than a very deadly military confrontation with tanks, artillery, and jets. Is there anything that the EU, that NATO, that the West, with the American leadership, can do in order to restrain Putin right now?
Before they can even start thinking about what they can do, they should understand, I think, in my opinion, one thing, that they don't understand who they're dealing with.
In what sense?
They think that Putin thinks in accordance with the particular sort of the normal logic that
give me an example.
For example, you know, he's supposed to be afraid of the sanctions. I'm not saying he likes the sanctions. He doesn't like them, but there are more important issues that he's thinking about. This whole idea, America being rational, being more or less disinterested in religion and spirituality, it sort of projects the same attitudes onto the Russians. The Russians are different. Russians are, they require deep spiritual, messianic meaning. And if Putin provides that, they are grateful.
Yeah.
And they're willing to take enormous risk and enormous sacrifices for the sake of that something that's something a little bit more, not a lot more lofty.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, the reason why they're so eager to do things, if someone gives them the reasons, to hire reasons to do that, is that for centuries they've been missing something which is, and that's again what the West doesn't understand. They've been missing their identity. They don't know who they are. If you wonder why the West doesn't understand what Putin is doing, I'll tell you one thing. They don't know what they're doing themselves. They have no idea. They don't know who they are. Of course we don't understand what they're doing, because they don't think, you know, they're clueless. And somebody comes and says, I'll tell you who you are. You are a great nation. Why? Because you're bringing the world to They will follow him to the end.
I will not ask you if there's going to be a war or not, because it's not a fair question. No one knows. But I'm going to ask you that. In the Western media, they get briefed by the intelligence community, which every 2 hours put out a classified report saying that the Russians are about to invade every hour, that Putin has laid down the orders, and it's a matter of days, it's a matter of hours. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe, I would put it this way. Do you think that Putin might be better off going to a war in Ukraine because he doesn't want to lose Ukraine? Or maybe he doesn't need to shoot a single bullet. By projecting the threat of going to invade, he gets meeting with Biden. He gets an open ear and open door to his interests. And the West is having a misconception here because Putin doesn't want to invade. And he will not invade because maybe he will, but it doesn't serve his interests. And not going to a war and just use the power, the military power as a leverage, benefits him more to his interests.
So far, he's doing great. He's managed to scare everyone. Who knows what kind of promises he's been getting. I'd like to refer to what Michael said earlier about 1930s. We don't want this to turn into another Munich. We don't want to, to give up and give in to pressures, to threats, and this is, he obviously prefers that.
But according to your great analysis of the Russian mind,
Mm-hmm.
heart and mind, do you think that there is that is likely that Putin will order a full-scale invasion
Now,
to the
I
Ukraine?
don't think so. Who knows,
Yeah, who knows? But
who knows?
what's the
No,
likely scenario and the unlikely scenario?
I think he, for the time being, hopefully not. Hopefully he's not gonna. He's getting his points. He's getting, he's getting what he wants, and he's also getting his rating in Russia.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's
Yeah.
skyrocketing. Which doesn't, of course, mean that in a year, half a year, who knows when, there may not be a situation where
Yeah.
he would take a province or another, who knows how much.
The great thing and the bad thing about this panel that I could have had a 1-hour conversation with each one of you, but we have time constraints, so I want to turn to you, Carissa Whitty, and your expertise is China, of course. And I want to ask something about China in the Middle East, because it's pretty much obvious that China and the U.S. are now in a battle over who is going to dominate the world or to be the next superpower. But what do you think are the Chinese interests in the Middle East? I mean, back in the Cold War, it was the Soviet bloc against the West, Israel with the U.S., the Arab states with the Soviet Union. Where do you put China now? Either enemy or an ally, an asset, a burden on Israel. On one point, they do business with Israel, and on the other hand, they sign a contract with Iran that can give them some oxygen to escape sanctions. What do you see as the interests of China here?
So before I go into that, I have to just weigh in, whether you want me to or not, and say that I'm willing to take a risk and say that the odds are Putin is not going into Ukraine, and I would say my assessment is based on China's behavior and China's the fact that China has kept all of its embassy full,
Mm-hmm.
and that China's way of running its diplomacy is quiet and behind the scenes, and it hasn't seemed very concerned. And Russia would pay a certain price with China, which is a very important client and associate of China's, if it put China in the extremely uncomfortable position of invading, because China has recognizes Ukraine as a country. And so
I guess it was a Chinese foreign minister 2 days ago who said that Ukraine has the right to stay
it's
independent.
Territorial integrity, absolutely. China wants to position itself, and this is relevant for us, and something that Michael mentioned with respect to Iran, that we can see sort of, with respect to the U.S., similarities with Iran and Ukraine and China. A lot of what we're seeing around the world has to do with American weakness, American internal conflict and confusion and loss of direction, and of course, it's a strong democracy, but at the same time, there is a global understanding that American principles are in question in lots of areas, or being questioned. America has made a lot of mistakes. We see China today because, to some extent, the subprime crash, where not only did that happen, but 2 years followed with no real recovery. And China said, you know what, maybe we have a better solution. And they started to gain confidence, and their confidence is growing by the day, and by the continued behavior of the United States. And we see it in the Middle East, because for the last 15 years, China has professed confusion and consternation about the Middle East. It's a swamp, we don't understand it, we're not going to go there. But since 2016, China has been the largest investor in the Middle East. And China is now responsible for smart cities, 5G, military bases under development or already built. There are military bases that we don't know about, or let's say aren't discussed in any polite society, that are run by China. China's got ports, it's in ports, it's got military personnel in Syria and has for years. China is building cities in Egypt, and China is all over Israel.
Yeah, but the question is if China can maintain its policy to play on different courts and doesn't have to make a decision which side to identify with.
Yep.
If it can maintain,
Friendship with everyone.
friendship with everyone, with Iran and with Israel.
Right. For now, until China is compelled, perhaps by U.S. Actions, to defend its interests in the region militarily, China is going to be able to stay friends with everyone for the foreseeable future. Right now, economic leverage from China is growing. China's looking for asymmetries, and all of us are falling into the trap on a regular basis. Few people are aware of China's unique style of statecraft and its long-term thinking and the way it is very successful at entering a fractured situation, entering the cracks and laying its foundations.
How does it manifest itself here in the Middle East?
So I just listed a whole bunch of ways. For example, in Iraq, we know that China, it is now the third largest Belt and Road country in the region. And that follows Pakistan, which is a long-term, all-weather partner of China's. Iraq is going to see huge amounts of Chinese investment, Chinese presence. How much that is going to be good or bad for Israel is a question of how Israel follows what's happening and prepares. If my view is that China itself, in and of itself for us in the Middle East, is not necessarily a threat. The threat is our own ignorance, lack of knowledge, unwillingness to really understand China's goals and the way it works. Because if we did understand that, we would be working on building our own asymmetries, and then we would have, everyone says, oh, we're so small, we can't do anything. It's not true. There are many ways of building leverage on our side that can be used, and not the least of which is working with friends and allies. The fact that Israel now has a kind of mini quad, if I can call it that, with US, India, UAE, and Israel. This is a powerful tool in the face of China. I also think it's important to state that China has no interest in Iran going nuclear. That will present China with another headache. And I think we see China's behavior in those negotiations as looking like it's a problem for us, mainly because their main target is the U.S. They're looking to distract the U.S., to hold the U.S. In all of these other problems, to minimize U.S. presence in the South China Sea, in the Far East. The best thing the U.S. could do, one step the U.S. could take to notably defang China's efforts, is enter the CPTPP, which is it's very frustrating for those of us who follow to see that for some domestic political reasons, the U.S. is not taking a step that would be a powerful statement of strength and unity and power without shooting a shot.
And coming back to our little corner here, because Israel has found itself up until now, and will find itself between the U.S. and China in this Titanic battle. I mean, both John Bolton and Mike Pompeo flew very suddenly to Israel, to the Prime Minister's office, sat with Bibi for 4 hours just to tell him that he cannot, by no means, let the Chinese have the new dock in Haifa port or the Sorek,
desalinization plant.
And then that was manageable. But what would you do? What would the future or the current Prime Minister of Israel would do when accepting Washington's request would mean starting a fight with Beijing?
It's a choice we would never have to make if Israel would just do one simple, tiny little thing.
Oh, yeah, what?
Develop a comprehensive strategic policy for China.
Give me an example for such a policy that can make us avoid this kind of choice.
Okay, so a policy is not going to be what Bibi would say he had a policy. Excuse my language, but I would say his policy was China's an ATM. A narrow economic approach to China is to lose the game. China looks at every aspect of society and every aspect of the country and engages it officially. I mean, you all probably know the United Front. The United Front is a ministry in China which is well known, and President Xi Jinping speaks about it. It not only engages all of the country, but it engages all of the world, all overseas Chinese. And where there are no overseas Chinese, other means are created to engage and find ways of including them in the process of advancing China's interests. So a policy with China, and everyone laughs at me when I say we need a comprehensive policy because everyone says we don't have a comprehensive policy on anything. And I say, you know what? And that's okay. You don't have to have a comprehensive policy on anything else because China's a unicorn. It is the only country on the planet with 350 million educated adults, all hardworking and willing to work for the leadership, a top-down, very strong leadership with a plan, a 5-year plan, a 25-year plan, and a 100-year plan, and the money to back it. Now, what does it take in business? Many of you know business. What does it take to succeed? You need the human resources, they've got it. You need the plan, they've got it. And you need the money to make it happen, they've got it. They've got the bandwidth to do everything at the same time. You know, they hosted most of the Gulf, and actually almost every single Middle East country either visited or had a phone call with Xi Jinping because around the time of the Olympics, including Xi Jinping making a phone call with Herzog. And everybody here feels like, wow, we're the most important region to China. Well, go to Southeast Asia, they'll say the same thing. Go to Latin America, they'll say the same thing. Go to Central Asia, and you pick a point on the planet, and they will say the same thing.
What if, sorry, but what if the theoretical question, okay? So China will invest with the Iranian in building a civilian port in the Persian Gulf, right? And the next thing you know, this port is used to host ICBMs or drones that hit Israel. And then Israel someday will hit it. And then the Chinese, will phone and say, you can do whatever you like. This part, excluded. And mind you, I want to remind the guys here that it was 2013. I was a diplomatic correspondent in Channel 10 network. And Bibi was about to make his first visit as Prime Minister to China. Very important visit. And then a group of American civilians was about, or actually indicted China in New York for its responsibility that the Bank of China provided money to a Hamas extremist group that did a terror attack in Jerusalem where few American civilians, Israeli, but American civilians, American civilians, citizens have died. And Bibi told, I think it was Cantor, the senator.
One person killed on the beach in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Okay.
What?
As well as one person killed on the beach, but I think Eric Cantor's nephew.
Yeah, it was Eric Cantor nephew. And Bibi phoned Cantor and told him, I'm going to send over one of my chief intelligence guy to give a statement, a witness, to be a witness to give a statement on the role, on the linkage between the Bank of China by to fund this exact group of terrorists in Gaza that did this terror attack that killed Cantor's nephew. The next thing that happened, that the phone rang in the Prime Minister's office, not far from him in Jerusalem, from the Prime Minister, from the President's office in Beijing, and practically told Bibi, if you're going to send this guy from the Shin Bet to be witness, to make a statement in this case, legal case in New York, you're not going to come to any kind of visit. And guess what happened? Bibi told him not to go. So it's not a theoretical. So what do you mean by saying we have to absorb or to develop some kind of foreign policy strategy against China? What it would look like?
There was no strategy, there was no policy, there were no relations. In 2013, we had exactly 2 years of building relations with China. Between 1949 and 2010, there were basically zero relations with China. We did intelligence trading and we did military. We provided them with all kinds of defense equipment and they gave us money. That was it.
Yeah.
They supported the Arab boycott. They were anti-Israel. They spoke anti-Israel. The currency wars was a bunch, the Protocols of Zion, and that ruled until 2010. So things started to slowly change when China became the second largest economy and said, okay, we don't have to kowtow to the Arabs that much, and they wanted to become innovators. We're going to need Israel eventually. And which is one of the reasons that I decided to create this organization, is because clearly China would be coming here and coming to the Middle East, and they did not understand anything. Because they are not a Judeo-Christian society. They are a Confucian, atheist, communist, Buddhist, Taoist society. So they have a completely different history. Just like I learned a lot right now about Russia, the Chinese have a whole different way of looking at things. After 10 years of building relations, we have huge people-to-people relations now. We have trained 20,000 students, small for China, but they're very carefully selected, to understand and have an affinity for Israel through Israel studies. There has been an enormous amount of business. Friends have been made, colleagues have been made, relations have been built, ambassadors, Chinese students studying here, etc. It's a whole different world right now. And if we knew how to capitalize on those bits and pieces, like the Haifa port. The Haifa port right now is a piece of leverage that we could use to strengthen our position with China. We just don't know how, because we're not used to it, because we're not used to doing a Chinese-style negotiation. So I chalk it up to ignorance and lack of willingness to learn, because, excuse my French, but the Israelis know everything, and they don't need to learn anything. And therefore, they are all set when it comes to China. And what does that mean? And also Russia probably too, although at least there are some Russians in Israel. But it means that we will be in exactly the kind of situation you're talking about, where some stupid little thing is going to cause us to fold, because we have no idea how powerful we are and where we're powerful and how to handle it.
Okay, as I told before to Michael and Anna, I could have maintained this conversation for an hour long more. And now I want to turn to you, Professor Eyal Zisser. And I don't know if everybody here knows Eyal Zisser, but he is, I think, my opinion, the number one expert for the Arab world and the Arab Sunni state around Israel. And I want to ask you, Professor Zisser, you know, we have seen some kind of really revolution of the mind with the Trump administration and the Abraham Accords. Because as in sushi, we used to think about the Middle East conflict as the inside out. First you're going to solve the Palestinian conflict, then you're going to make peace with the Arabs in the broader belt. And Bibi and Trump made it outside in. So first of all, we're going to normalize relations with the Arab states around us, and then this might put pressure on the Palestinians to make concessions and so on. But I want to ask you two questions. First of all, do you think there is a likely scenario of this normalization going forward to states like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, maybe in the future Iraq? Or it's not just, you know, a matter of time. There is a psychological barrier you have to cross there. And about the superpower game here, it's almost conventional wisdom that America is in decline and then, you know, withdraw from the Middle East. Do Arab states around us have any alternative, a real alternative, rather than to be an ally of the United States right now?
Okay. Coming back to Russia, I read a statement made by Lavrov, the foreign minister, the Russian foreign minister, who said, you know, Ukraine is not an exception. We are fully committed to all Russian communities in the world. And you know, when speaking about Russian community in the sense that people speak Russia and keeps the culture, in Israel, we have the largest Russian community in the world. So we may expect the Russian coming to help us the way they used to help, you know, their allies in Eastern Europe, God forbid. But coming back to your point. First of all, you know, Michael wrote about 67. Nasser led the entire region into a war. 10 years later, Sadat led the entire region into peace together with Begin. It's not the case anymore. The decline, first of all, it's of the Arab world. The Arabs are not anymore real significant players. The fate of the region is not dictated here in Cairo or Baghdad or Damascus, but either
because of the oil issue or because of the domestic?
No, but the decline of the economies, of the societies. So it's the emergence of Iran and to a certain degree Turkey, and of course, once again, Russia. And now, first with Russia, Putin is a magician, not because he's so successful when it comes to the Middle East, but because he can project a victory when there is no victory. I mean, we speak about, you know, the decline of the United States, the weakness of the United States. Putin has in Syria 20 to 30, maybe 35 aircrafts. Putin has in Syria 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 soldiers. America has in the Middle East right now 10 times aircrafts and 10 times soldiers, and still he is considered to be victorious. I mean, he ruined Syria. The Syrians ruined Syria themselves, you know. He ruined Syria.
Let me argue.
The difference between Afghanistan and Syria is that he spent their billions, not trillions like the Americans. He didn't send Russian troops, but used the Iranian. But it's an impasse. It's a stalemate. You know, speaking about Syria, what Syria needs now in order to be an asset, a real asset, not only a place on the map where you can say, I did it, is money. And the only source for money is the United States. And this is I think all Arab countries are afraid of of Russia. But they do understand that the only advantage or the only card Russia has is not, they don't need more weapons. The only card they have is to come to you, that they come to you, the Russian, and say, don't interfere with me, otherwise I will kick you. On the other hand, the Americans can offer what the Middle East really needs: funds, economic support. That's what the Arab world is of
But-
need. And another
But
thing,
Carissa's friend can do it maybe
yeah,
better.
but the Chinese are smart enough not to invest in ruin societies and countries when they will not see any revenue. The other thing is, with today there is the rift between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Iran is perceived as a major threat to the entire region. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has to do with the national security of the Arab world. Now, Russia is a problematic ally because Russia is it's not a close ally of Iran, but the fact is that they work together. They work together. So when the Gulf states ask themselves, can we rely on the Russian? No, they can't rely on Russia because at the moment of truth, Russia will prefer the Iranian rather than support. So they stick to the United States. This is something we can see. And, you know, the Americans are not living, you know, in Syria. There is still 1/4 of Syria. 25% of the Syrian territory is still held by the Americans with 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. Trump already in December 2018 spoke about sands and war. We have nothing to do there. And they are still there. And with these 2,000 soldiers, they stopped the Russian from increase their influence there. So I think the problem with the Russian, they are trying to play with the Americans, but the Americans are not interested at all in this game, in the sense that, you know, the whole idea behind invading Syria was to come to the table and say to the American, well, we did this move. What is your move? And we'll see. But the American didn't care about Syria. This is why the Russians are there. So what? So what? Okay?
I tell you so what, because if the Syrian, the part of Syria that is under the control of Bashar al-Assad regime, the sponsor is Putin, then you cannot bomb as much as you want there if you don't have Putin's green light. So he is the landlord.
Yeah, but
and you don't want Putin to be the landlord when you have interest.
Where does it lead Russia in the sense that you know they expect revenues, but the economy is yes. As far as Israel is concerned, you have to take him into consideration.
This is bad news.
No doubt about it. I don't say that he was defeated, not at all. But it is not the big winner.
So let's talk about the normalization.
And now normalization. I mean, the common wisdom was for many years that, you know, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, all Arab countries would be ready to, you know, develop intimate, close, but secret alliance, mainly when it comes to security issues with Israel. But there is, you know, this roof, this glass, they will not work because of the Palestinian issue. Unless there is progress in the Israeli-Palestinian track, they would never, you know, make peace. What happened was that it's not only that they make peace, but when we speak about the warmness of these relations, this is the big surprise. We have peace with Egypt, but this is peace between the leaders, between the security establishment. It had nothing to do with people to people. It had nothing to do, you know, in Jordan, we are the most hated country among Jordanians. They hate Israel, they demonstrate against Israel, and then they come back to their houses, open, you know, the water there. It's water from Israel, the light is from Israel, but they hate us, okay? This is not the case with the Emirates. What is surprising us is that we are not speaking only on the official level. We are speaking of the people-to-people level. And this means that we read wrongly, you know, the way public opinion in many Arab countries, we thought always that the public opinion is the obstacle. It's not the obstacle, at least when it comes to the Emirate. It's not only that it's not the obstacle, clearly the leaders, the ruler of the Emirate had it in mind when they signed these agreements, and we said it's because of Trump.
Professor Zisser, we are out of time, but let me be greedy.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, normalization with Israel, yes or no?
Well, it's more complicated.
Yeah, I know.
because
That's
it's,
why I ask you. I mean,
no,
you're
it's
the
more,
professor.
It's you know, like we used to say 2-3 years ago with the Emirate, it cannot happen. It
Okay.
cannot happen because of the religious dimension. This is a country that it's all about, you know, the religious prestige and the image of the rulers, the Kaaba, Medina,
So
Mecca.
maybe
It's
after
much bigger.
after the father King Salman will
Yes,
pass
but
away.
you know, when Benny Gantz, the defense minister, flew to Bahrain in an aircraft of the Israeli Air Force, he did it through Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we don't need to be greedy.
Yeah.
We need to be patient.
Good point. Speaking of greedy, we could probably be here another hour discussing this, but we are tight to time. We're going to take some questions for about 10 minutes. If anyone, there we go, questions.
Hi, my name is David Schimmel from the Council of Presidents' Friends. Nobody has mentioned Turkey at all here. And they're obviously a significant player in the region, and they have now, after being so estranged from Israel for many years, are trying to see if they can work their way back in. I was wondering how that plays into all of these discussions.
Who wants to? Yeah.
I want to say that, you know, 10 years ago, Erdogan has a dream, you know, Muslim revolutions all over the Middle East. He will be the next or the new Sultan, Morsi in Egypt, the Muslim Brothers in Syria, Hamas in Gaza. This didn't happen. On the contrary, and then there is the tension between the American and the Russian, and the emergence of Iran, and he was left with any friends. This makes him more realistic in the sense that, well, it's time to improve. Not, of course, it's not the alliance we had 20 years ago, but to improve relations with Israel.
I agree. It's,
Yeah.
it's a combination. It's Russia being ascendant. It's America in retreat. It's the Turkish economy, but it's also the Abraham Accords. And so he's being pushed from many different directions toward us.
And I think that my, how do you say in American, my 5 cents, 10 cents,
My
Yeah.
2 cents, 1 cent.
Yours is 25.
So what expression? 2?
My 2 cents.
My 2 cents is that Erdogan put Israel now in a dilemma. Because Erdogan wants to normalize relations for his domestic and national security reasons. And obviously, you are talking about a guy who is very unpredictable, and you're going to mend relations, to normalize relations, and in the next first day of the Gaza conflict, he's going to say that we are anti-Semitic, and Bibi is Hitler, and Bennett is Goebbels. And then what do? I mean, it's
Not to mention Greece and Cyprus.
yeah. I mean, it's a nutcase. It's a nutcase, and is deeply rooted. Is deeply rooted in ideology that I don't want to call it anti-Semitic, but but it's the Muslim Brotherhood who view the Jewish sovereignty, nor each of any of us as a person as a Jew, not in terms of gas chambers, right? But as a sovereign Jewish state, it's something that is not natural to the region, and it's deeply rooted in this ideology. So now he has a pragmatic interest to mend relations and to go back to normalizations, and he is and Bougie Herzog in a bromance, and okay, fine. But it's very tricky with him, and I'm not sure that in the Israeli national security community they really see normalized relation now with Turkey, with Erdogan right now, is only an asset and not a burden. Yes, next question.
Go ahead, questions?
Questions.
There we go.
So my question relates to NATO. In 2008, at the Bucharest summit, NATO had an opportunity to offer a pathway to membership to Ukraine and Georgia. It wasn't done, and then in August there was the invasion of Georgia, Ossetia, and Abkhazia. And then we could move later on to 2014 with Crimea. Now, in that period, the Balts and others started to think that maybe NATO, not responding to all of this, was considering a two-tier situation for NATO. That there would be the traditional members of NATO, and then those who came in later would be in kind of a lesser status. Now that's gone, that hasn't been discussed for some time, but in light of what's happening in Ukraine, do you see NATO perhaps considering the neo-isolationist public opinion in many countries, including our own, that moving again in this direction or thinking about a two-tier strategy?
Regarding Ukraine?
No, regarding the Balts, perhaps others in Eastern Europe. In other words, there would be major members of NATO and perhaps some lesser members of NATO.
That's us.
Okay.
Dan, that's us. We have a friend status with NATO. We're not members of NATO. I don't think we should join NATO. But you're talking about something similar to an Israel-style relationship with NATO.
No. I was talking about members of NATO already in NATO.
You're talking about downgrading. You're talking about downgrading. Downgrade of this. Downgrade.
Yes. Yeah. Two-tier downgrade. Yes.
Just to ease tension with Moscow. Oh, I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. I'll tell you. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, I was invited among a group of Israeli journalists by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania to Lita. It's something that governments do. And then the Israeli foreign minister here invited a group of Lithuanian journalists, and they show us around the country and the government and the people and the culture, blah, blah, blah. And then they took us to the forest to a joint military operation of NATO in Lita, in Lithuania. Now, Lithuania doesn't share a border with Russia. It shares borders with Belarus, but it doesn't share a border with Russia. And I was wandering there in the forest. I took my head and I said, well, I'm kind of a Hollywood set of a Second World War movie. What's going on, guys? All the way, and this is Tallinn over there. What's going on, guys? And as more as I talk to them, of the Lithuanian, they are convinced. It's not something that is even arguable there. They are convinced that Putin will use the first opportunity to go through Belarus and to gain again the Baltic states. That means, in that case, Lithuania, back to the Soviet realm or the Russian realm. They are convinced. They did a 5-day long military exercise in the forest of Lithuania in 2018, I think. I mean, what are the... Maybe they're drunk. No.
No, but the
so
polls
going back to your question.
paranoid.
Going back to your question. These guys in the Baltic states, right? They are not even willing to start to think of downgrading anything. They want to enhance. And I think that the current situation, I asked Anna beforehand, that maybe Putin is having the upper hand here. Although he didn't get the commitment by the West not to expand NATO eastward to Ukraine. I said it that maybe he has the upper hand because he gained important points for him. For instance, if Lithuania thought, or the Baltic states as a whole, thought about enhancing the partnership with NATO in terms of commitments and in terms of number of troops on the ground, I don't think they're going to do it right now because everyone saw that you don't want to mess with a nutcase from the Kremlin. So there is a chill effect. Even though Putin didn't shoot a bullet and didn't order a single soldier inside on Ukraine soil, it has a chill effect.
I think it's
so
important.
I think the Baltic is going to pay the price for this chill effect of Ukraine.
So the beauty of political discussion is that it can go on for hours, as Moab said. But
Just
we're-
let them. I have another.
Yeah.
I have another few
All
minutes.
right.
Yeah.
I,
I'm the problem because I work in TV, and with TV we have deadline, and the deadline is approaching, and I have to go. But I'm going to say a little bit more. Yeah.
I have to chime in and say that as soon as a point on the global map takes a step back and concedes in some way, the global order concedes in any small way, China is watching and taking notes. And it is a big mistake to do anything that looks like you're taking a step back from what you've already done, you Americans. You must remember that China is looking to reshape the global order, I don't want to say in its image, but in a way that it is more conducive to China's interests. So the opposite, you need to do things like AUKUS, the US, UK, Australia deal. That was a very powerful statement. Don't downgrade anything that's already existing. Think about strengthening, not downgrading.
Mike, thank you, Caris.
I wanna
Mike,
ask-
I have a question
I
about-
can ask a question to Anna. Anna, if Putin succeeds in the Ukraine, what would stop him from moving on the Baltic states?
NATO.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But not Lithuania?
And Biden
Lithuania
sent
is
troops.
not part of NATO.
Biden has sent troops.
I did a state visit to Lithuania. I saw the same thing that Moab did. They're terrified.
Last time I
Terrified.
was in Poland, they're terrified.
They're terrified.
In Poland.
Yeah, but mind you, Biden, you can tell many bad things about Biden and not sending troops to Ukraine. But Biden is enhancing troops in Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states in order to deter Russia from going further. He said, like, okay, the NATO.
8,000 troops. There's
Okay. Come on.
right.
No, aircraft carriers.
It's not-
Aircraft carriers. I mean, we are not longer in 6-day wars with tanks. But I wanna add to Caris. I want to tell you a story. Caris just said that the Chinese looking very carefully about the outcome of the Ukraine crisis right now. And one of my reporters in my network did a short interview with a young guy from Taiwan. And the young Taiwanese told him that now, in these very days, many of his friends in Taiwan thinking about packing and immigrate to another country, to the West, because they view Ukraine and they realize that the United States is not going to stand by Taiwan in the day the Chinese are going to do something in Taiwan. So you see the ramification of Ukraine not only on the Baltic states, not only in Israel, but on Taiwan.
On the other hand, in Moscow, in Russia,
Yeah.
any kind of downgrading is seen as weakness, obviously, and it only strengthens the regime.
So we are out of time, but we can
Texas
make
and
a day to a
Mexico.
beer afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Professor Geifman, Caris Witte, Professor Zisser, Ambassador Orr, and Moab Vardi, thanks so much. You guys were awesome.
Starting momentarily.
Professor, great job.
טוב, תן לי גם מבט.